called The Telephone Assassin, and today, right here on the Speakers Inc., we speak a Global Speakers Showcase series. You find out exactly why. His name is Anthony, and I have a really strong feeling that you're going to walk away today with a really good idea and a really good option as to how to make your team more effective and more incredible and powerful when it comes to being on the telephone and having those ever important conversations. Once the talk is over, we will of course be chatting to Anthony for a couple of minutes, as we always do with our speakers. And then you have the ability to log on to speakersinc.com, find out more about Anthony, all of the other speakers, talk to Bronwyn, Duncan, they will give you the details, find out how you can make Anthony part of your next experience. Next up, ladies and gentlemen, as I said, he's the telephone assassin. Someone that is on a mission to get business talking again and stopping people from hiding behind their emails, websites, and social media. We all do. A published author and international speaker, although he often uses training to accelerate the learning process, he has fast become the go-to person when it comes to telephone engagement and helping companies to improve both sales and service through conversation. You're about to find out why he picked up the name of, as I said, the Telephone Assassin. So please, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Anthony Stears, the Telephone Assassin.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Dwayne. It's great to be here. As you've heard, I'm Anthony Stears and welcome to Assassin HQ. I am known as the Telephone Assassin, but please don't worry, it is not as aggressive as it sounds. When my friends ask me what I do, I say I teach people good manners and advanced common sense. Basically show them how to be polite enough that people want to talk to you, but also understand the emotional journey you have to take people through in order to get them to take action and do something as a result of speaking to you. Technically, I'm a conversational strategist, although I often get billed as a sales speaker or customer service speaker or trainer, but I do love to interact with audiences, although keynoting is a big favorite of mine too. Today, obviously, I haven't got much time to showcase for you, so I need to balance it up between showing you a little bit of my content, and I'm going to share with you my 5 conversation steers. So this is a cool structure that people can follow just to give them tips in order to get people to listen to them, to like them, and to take action as a result of speaking to you, but also some tips about how to prevent what I would call pipeline constipation. Now, obviously, I like to tailor my sessions to my audience. So this is usually based around a briefing call with yourselves and finding out a bit about your team and the challenges that they face. So I'll explain how I can expand certain elements as I go and what I can do at the end for longer sessions or even programs that I can help to deliver to your team. So let's get going. As I mentioned, I've got my 5 conversation steers and I'm going to give them to you in the order in which they appear within a conversation. They're made up of 2 golden rules at either end of the call and then the 3 phases of the conversation that you need to be aware of. So the first thing I often talking about telephone etiquette, is one of my golden rules, which is called PTS. It's permission to speak. And basically, I believe that you should be getting permission to speak at the beginning of your conversations. People do it in a variety of different ways, but the way I wrap it in great customer service and excellent manners is usually by phoning and assuming that I've called at a bad time and asking if there's a better time to call back. This seems to be pretty disarming. People tend to think you've made it so easy for them to get out of this conversation that you can't possibly be in sales, or if you are in sales, you're not very good at it. So it's quite a disarming thing that people think, well, there's never a good time to call me. Go on then. What did you want to talk about? So this is a really good way to start a call to make sure that you're not forcing conversations and you're not guilty of what I would call premature elaboration. This is where an overexcited salesperson phones you up and either reads a script or just blurts a pitch down the phone to you. This premature elaboration sets off alarm bells that say it's a sales call and usually puts most people off, puts them into defensive mode, or they become combative in the conversation, and it's not pleasant for anybody really. So that's my PTS, permission to speak. Once you've done this, you can move into the first of the 3 phases of a conversation you need to be aware of. The first one is all around building rapport. Basically, you want to get people to like you. And you can do this in two ways. You can use excellent manners. So one of the examples I often give is when you're prospecting or looking for new business, it should feel like you're dropping off a pizza menu. Okay, and what I mean by that is hopefully you've had those takeaway menus put through your letterbox in the past. I know that they want us to use the apps now, but they still seem to come through the door every now and then. But what often happens is people say, well, yeah, I've had that happen before. And when I say, well, have you ever had them knock on your door and ask to take your order? Could you imagine that? Hi there, Domino's here. Can I take your order? That's just rude. And people often, when I give that example, sort of snigger in the audience and think, well, yeah, actually, yeah, that's pretty rude. And that's how some people come across, particularly in sales when they're prospecting. So this is something that we can do when we're reaching out to people, is making it feel like we're dropping off a pizza menu and just creating awareness rather than trying to sell to somebody on our first contact with them. Second thing that you can do to build rapport is use research. We all have the same favorite topic of conversation. That is ourselves. It's the thing we know most about. It's the thing we care most about. And the more information you have about people, the easier it is to get them to like you and to flatter them. It really works wonders no matter what age, what sex the person is that you're speaking to. The more information you know about them, the easier it is to kind of get them to like you and to add a little bit of lubrication into the conversation. So there's 2 tips just for building rapport alone. Again, I can dig a little bit deeper on this when we get to do open sessions, so that we can look at where you find your research, how you weave it into the conversation. But I think that gives you a bit of a taster of how I talk about building rapport. Once you've done this first stage, you can move into the middle part of the conversation. Now, I call this establishing your credibility. Some people refer to it as perfecting your pitch. And I suppose no matter what you want to call it, it doesn't matter if you're a lawyer or a landscaper, the principles work exactly the same. It's all about sharing success stories people can relate to. Okay, I'll say that again. That's sharing success stories people can relate to. Now, what most salespeople do is what I would refer to as name dropping. They talk about their biggest client. Okay, it makes them feel big and it makes them feel good, but often it can intimidate the person that you're speaking to. And I know this as a speaker. I often find myself in rooms full of smaller business owners. There is no point me coming out on stage and telling them that I've done work with Microsoft and BT and Lathwaites and GSK. I can name some big companies, but it doesn't really resonate with them. And this is why I work with companies to build their credibility library. Credibility library. These are just 1-page PDF type case studies that are labeled appropriately so people know when to use them. This is again something that on a larger session with your team, we can dig into and we can really look at what that would look like for you guys. So we could phone some existing customers and find out what it is they really like about us and start to build this credibility library. Now, it's great for a few different reasons. 1, it's free marketing material. 2, it's great for self-esteem. On those bad days when your sales guys or customer service teams get out of bed the wrong side, get them to have a read through your credibility library. Nothing will pick you up by reminding yourself about how grateful your clients are. And thirdly, it's great because it allows you to establish credibility even if you're a new starter. So when you bring on new starters who perhaps aren't hugely knowledgeable, maybe not hugely technical, they can still show that as a business we are very credible, and they can get that across to people very quickly. So this is what I refer to as your credibility library. That's the second stage of the conversation. So we've got them to like us. We've now got them to respect us. That third and final part of the conversation is all around creating urgency. This is because we want them to take action and do something as a result of speaking to us. So I don't know if you're aware, but in the car industry, they know you are 78% more likely to buy a car once you've driven it. 78%. So what I do with my clients is figure out what are the test drives we could offer our prospects in order for them to experience what we're like to work with and get some kind of value at that very early stage. Now, for some companies, this is a sequence of test drives. If you're in the software world, you usually do a bit of a demonstration to start off with, an online demo. If they like the demo, you'll move them on to a trial, perhaps give them 30 days to use the system. If you sell products, you may send out samples to people. You may ask them to review products. You may ask them to come to a demo day. or a sample day. There could be various different things that you can do. For some companies, it's as simple as giving out a tip sheet or booking a discovery meeting, just to go and visit a client and scope out the issues that they're having so that you could put forward some form of quotation, which again is a type of test drive. So this is again something that we can work on with your teams to really expand what are the best test drives for the different products and services that you offer that would help to move your clients one step closer through your pipeline and closer to saying yes. So I've now told you about the 3 stages of the conversation, and we started with that golden rule of the permission to speak. The final thing that I'm going to share with you, which I hope you're going to find useful too, is something called TFR. Take final responsibility. This is the only way that I believe that you can prevent or at least limit what I would call pipeline constipation. This is making sure that you have the next conversation already booked into the diary before you finish your present conversation with somebody. So if I was dropping off my pizza menu, which would be a case study to show somebody what an existing client may say about us, what I might ask them is, well, I will send this over to you, but can I ask, do you think you'll get a chance to look at it over the next week or 2? And I often say a week or 2 because I think that's a reasonable time frame to give somebody to have a chance to look at what I'm going to send them. And over 80% of people just agree and say, oh yeah, I'm sure I'll get a chance to look at it by then. So I can then follow that up. And my TFR is, well, fantastic. If there's any immediate questions or if you'd like to have a little test drive or look closer, please don't hesitate to come back to me. But just so I don't forget about you, I'm going to make a note in my diary for 2 weeks' time so that if I haven't heard from you, I'm going to give you a quick courtesy call. 1, to double check that my email got through your spam filter, because there is going to be an attachment. But 2 is to see if we can figure out what kind of test drive you would find most useful so that you can see what we're like to work with. 4 out of 5 people just go with the flow and they're happy for that phone call in a couple of weeks' time. But 1 out of 5 will often turn around and go, well, what do you mean by a test drive? And this is a buying signal and a great way to move somebody forwards. The TFR can be used in other ways too, more operational, I suppose. If somebody needed to fill out some form of questionnaire or a new account form, for example, you may agree to send that over to them once they decide that they want to sign up. What I do in these situations is my TFR is I allow them to set the deadline. So I'd say, okay, well, look, this form should take you around 10 minutes to fill in. I'll email it over to you this afternoon. But realistically, when do you think you're likely to get this back to me by? And I let them set the deadline. And quite often people, they may say the end of the day, but the most common answer seems to be by the end of the week. And when they say that, I literally follow it up with a fantastic, in which case I can get it loaded up on our system over the weekend and it'll be ready for you next week. But just in case you don't get round to doing it, or there's any elements that you need some help with or you're a bit stuck on, could we book a 10 or 15 minute call on Friday afternoons, perhaps at 4 o'clock, so that if you haven't got around to doing it, I can help you and we can make sure it gets done. But obviously, if you send it to me before then, I'll give you back the gift of time and you can take an extra tea break. You can also weave the TFR into voicemails and also voicemail sequences. I often get asked about that and dealing with gatekeepers. And again, this is something that I can give people a few different techniques that they can use in order to improve their success rate of getting through to decision makers. Hopefully, if I give you a quick recap now, this gives you a bit of a flavor of my sort of content. Now, this is the core stuff that I tend to share. So my 5 conversation steers are getting permission to speak at the beginning of a call. This is crucial. Building rapport, and you can do this by using a little bit of research, but mainly just using good manners. Establishing your credibility by sharing success stories people can relate to, and creating urgency by offering a test drive that's a really easy next step that demonstrates the value that you can offer and what you guys are like to work with. And finally, to prevent any type of pipeline constipation, you use TFR. You take final responsibility for the next time you're going to speak to them. The TFR bit is so, so crucial. And if you don't take anything else away, please do try this out. I think we often forget, we remind our teams perhaps that they need to take responsibility for their actions. If you have teenage children, you might have said the TFR thing, but changed out the F for something different. But hopefully my tips are nice and simple, they're practical, they help people to improve their customer service and drive sales. When I get a chance to spend a bit longer with my audiences, then quite often I will get them making phone calls, and we can do some exercises too. So if you can get me involved in your event, even if it's just as a keynote, if we can do it around a break, I'll often get people going away and getting testimonials and getting those feedback calls. This is a great way to boost people's confidence, give them a positive association with the telephone, and also start building your credibility library, plus lots of free marketing material too. Other exercises I like to run with teams is to do a mapping exercise. Quite often, as part of a longer program, I like to map out the full prospect to customer journey of all of the touch points that may come into play. But often I work with clients to tackle very specific phone calls so that we can come up with a call structure and look out for the red flags, which could be guilt grenades, blame throwers, all kinds of things that we use in conversations to try and pass the blame on to somebody else. But we can also create call cards using these exercises. I've had clients that we create 5 or 6 different call cards. This is an example of a retention program I did for a sales kickoff session for one of my long franchise clients. And we worked out that there's 5 conversations that they need to have in the first 30 days to stop any kind of issues happening and make sure that clients onboard successfully and continue to use us ongoing, and we retain them as a client. Hopefully this gives you a nice little flavor of my content, a little bit about my personality too. I know Dwayne's going to be asking me some questions and grilling me a bit now as well, but hopefully you've enjoyed this. As I mentioned, I've been Anthony Stears, the telephone assassin. Please, if you're interested or you think I can help your team, get in touch with Bronwyn or Duncan at Speakers Inc. I would love to have a chat with you guys too, find out how I could help you guys take control of your conversations. Thanks ever so much for listening. And Dwayne, fire away with those questions.
So Anthony, thank you very much for your time. Very interesting, intriguing, in fact, because I have so many questions, and I think a lot of our viewers have the same, feeling like this particular topic is one that we can dive a little deeper into. And I'm sure on your full talk, you do exactly that. But the first question I'm going to ask you this morning is, do you really think cold calling is dead?
It's one of the phrases that's been going around for a long time. And I would say cold calling is dead in the fact that you have no excuse to cold call somebody anymore. Cold calling used to be sitting there with like the phone book or the yellow pages, and you would phone through and talk to as many people as you could and get hung up on a lot. And eventually somebody would say yes. And that was kind of sort of how it worked. Whereas now you've got access to so much information online. You can do a lot of research beforehand. You can check people out before you phone them. So the more information you have about people, the easier it is to kind of spark up a conversation or show interest in them and flatter them. And that's quite a nice way to start the call off. So
that makes perfect sense, though, because that, for me, then, doesn't really sound like cold calling anymore. This is cold calling with a very definite advantage.
Absolutely. Well, you kind of play on the fact that as adults, we all have our same favorite topic of conversation, and that is ourselves. It's the thing we know most about. It's the thing that we care most about. And it doesn't matter how old you are, what sex you are. It doesn't matter where you're sat. Flattery works on everybody. And the more you can tell somebody that you found out about them in your research and how impressed you are, you can actually hear their head swelling at the end of the phone. It's lovely. And there's this thing in it, because we're human beings and we do like to talk about ourselves. After 3, 4, 5 minutes of somebody talking all about you, and you like it because it's usually very complimentary, you start to feel like, well, I should probably ask stuff about them. Otherwise, I'm going to look like I'm really self-centered and a really arrogant person. So it's a lovely way. If you start the conversation by showing an interest in somebody else, they usually, once you've kind of indulged them a little bit, they tend to then start to bounce it back. And then you get an opportunity to open up as well.
Which then obviously leads me to the next question, which is, if that is the case and cold calling isn't really what we remember it being, why are people still so terrified of cold calling? If you've got this ability to do the research and be more prepared, why is it still so frightening?
Well, I think that one of the main reasons is I think we've all received that horrible sales call from somebody who isn't listening, who's probably a bit pushy and a bit rude, who's barged into your day. And we don't want to come across like that. so you've got that element that we have this negative association with being cold called. There's a nerve element as well. What if they don't like me? What if they tell me to go away? Then sometimes people throw scripts into the mix as well. They say, well, here's your script. And I don't really like scripts. I like a structure. It keeps people on track. And scripts, people don't tend to learn them like an actor would. Obviously, you're an MC, so when you go on stage, you try and learn your lines and things like that so that you're ready for it. Whereas in sales, a lot people tend to keep their script out, which means you tend to read it and you can tell if somebody's reading. And the biggest issue with having scripts the main one is that the person that you're speaking to has not been sent their copy of the script. So usually they say something totally off the wall that you're not expecting, and if you try and stick to the script, you distort the flow of it. So I think it's a bit of a minefield, but I think most of us have got this negative association with having a horrible sales call, and we don't want to be that person who interrupts somebody's day and comes across like that. And that's why a lot of what I do is actually etiquette. I say to people, I teach them good manners and advanced common sense, so how to be polite enough that people want to talk to you. But at the same time, you need to understand the emotional journey you've got to take somebody through before you can expect to ask them to do something as a result of speaking to you, which is why I see some rather aggressive salespeople who are trying to I ask people what's their biggest challenge. And I said, well, how often would you share your biggest, deepest challenge with a complete stranger on the telephone?
Yeah. Doesn't make sense, does it?
Yeah.
No, not right up front anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's more about, I think, cultivating relationships rather than selling. And I think if you can concentrate on that, cold calling is not as daunting and horrible as you think. It's usually about timing and just reaching out and being proactive.
And I suppose listening is the biggest skill anybody's got on a cold call. You need to listen as much as you possibly can. Now, you obviously go into certain institutions, certain companies, and certain situations and give them advice on what to do in a cold calling, in a prospective type of environment. What is the one thing you always tell them not to do? There's got to be one particular thing where you say, whatever you do, don't do this.
Okay, so if you're basically with an outbound conversation or an outbound call, particularly a prospecting call, you have to be careful. I talked about that, people reading scripts. You've got to be careful of this thing. When you're really nervous and your heart starts to race because the phone rings, all right, and then your mouth goes really dry and you're thinking, please don't answer. Please just go to voicemail. You do the voicemail prayer, okay? And then when somebody does answer, if you're really nervous and you've got a script, you tend to just blurt it out. You kind of do this whole, and you can hear the intake of breath. When you answer the phone, you'll hear it. People go, hello there, this is my name and this is my company, and I'm going to speak really quickly so you can't interrupt me, and I'm going to hit you with a feature followed by a benefit in the hope that by the time I finish speaking, if you haven't hung up, there's a really small chance that you might say yes. And you can hear them almost panting and being out of breath. So I joke, I call this premature elaboration. Okay, it's an overexcited salesperson or a desperate salesperson who can't hold on to their pitch. And if you start your calls like that, you just set off alarm bells that say it's a sales call. Yep. So that's the one tip I always give people, is don't do that at the beginning. But I suppose, and I don't want to trump your question here by squeezing in a second one.
Please do.
The one thing that I think helps you for prospecting, for sales, for great customer service, it's another golden rule. So that permission, I talk about permission to speak at the beginning of calls, but at the end of every call, I mentioned in my talk that obviously you have that TFR, taking final responsibility, and that is the only way that you can prevent what I would call pipeline constipation. Okay, so if there's only one thing that you take that's going to make a really big difference and get people to take action, it's the TFR that I mentioned in the talk, that just allows you to get the next step in the diary so that you don't end up having that really excited first conversation, and then 2, 3, 4 weeks later, they don't respond to your emails, they don't call you back. Yeah, so the TFR, I suppose, is the real big one.
Your second question was better than my first, so thank you very much for putting that in. I appreciate that. Next thing is, now we go with examples, a couple of really good examples, practical examples of how you are currently working with companies in terms of how you go in. What are the first things you do? What do you leave them? What do you give them?
So when we go in, I always start off, I give them some etiquette stuff to begin with. Okay, so I show them how to be polite, how to stay in control of the conversation, how to prepare for the call so that you can be credible, using the success stories that I talked about earlier on. And then we end up mapping their whole customer journey, but it's actually a prospect to customer journey. So it starts at that very beginning point where you're trying to reach out to them. You might end up doing your test drive and offering them some form of demo. Then you move them into sort of closing the deal. Then you need to do the first bit of delivery. Then you need to get some feedback and get a case study. And it kind of, once you map out the journey for people, it, particularly in teams, it's a really useful way of making sure that everybody knows each individual step that needs to be taken. Okay, that way you don't skip any steps and you don't get to the end of the pitch and try and close it and end up with a no. Because if you don't follow the steps and you skip them, you tend to miss something that will come back and get you later on. So what I try to do with people is, once we map out this journey, is we can turn them basically into call cards. So here's a quick example of a company, a franchise business that I've worked with for quite a few years. And we ran a retention program where we mapped out all of the basically all of the touch points with our customers and all of the things that might go wrong, particularly in the early stages when bringing a new customer on board. And we came up, or they came up with a lot. I mean, there was 120 people in the room. I think we came up with like 50, 60 different little things, subtle little things that could go wrong. Not all the time, not necessarily common things. But we ended up mapping out this journey, and we put in catch points to make sure that if one of these things went wrong, we knew what to say. But we also were weaving in things beforehand to limit the chance of this thing going wrong. So we created these 5 call cards that are the 5 conversations that you need to have in the first 30 days in order to make sure that you don't lose any new customers who are coming on board. So this can be a really sort of helpful way. And by giving somebody then these call cards, you have a structure to follow rather than a script in front of you where you end up sort of getting sort of drawn in and trying to read it. So that's what I do with all of my clients. But recently I've worked with a bank who basically wanted me to come in and help their team deal with difficult conversations. And what they mean by difficult conversations is where they have to go and tell people that they've been declined for finance. Okay, but these are people who are perhaps slightly vulnerable. They're new business type loans, people who have their own challenges, who feel that they deserve the loan and that they're entitled to it. So we had to talk about how, as human beings, we use guilt grenades and blame throwers. There are tactics to protect ourselves in blaming everybody else and trying to make you feel bad for me. But there's subtle things that we could do. But what was interesting is I think we came up with 12 different things they could weave into their conversations that would put them back in control of the conversation. And there's just simple things like using a pre-frame. So, for example, because people are after business loans, somewhat part of the process was to find out a little bit about their business. The problem is when you ask somebody about their business, they like to waffle on a bit. And their calls were ending up being really long because people are telling them the ins and outs of their business. So simple things like saying, in under 90 seconds, can you just tell me a bit about your business? And all of a sudden, what can go into 5, 7, 8 minutes, you can keep to under 2. Okay, so little things like that, but there were things that they could do that meant that they could pre-warn people that they might get declined. So it was just interesting that it was the team themselves that came up with these ideas, but I just showed them how to weave them into the conversation itself so that they have more control of what happens next in the conversation and how to guide the conversation, which is why I sort of play on my Anthony Steers conversations, because basically that's what I try and help people do, is steer the conversation so that you can help somebody to buy. Typically, you're not trying to sell to them, you're just trying to help them to buy. And I think that's the real way that sales has changed over the last sort of 5, 10, 15 years, is that people have made a lot of their buying decisions online before they've even walked into the shop or they contacted you. So your job is to actually help them to buy as opposed to try and sell and close them.
Right. Anthony, look, I could talk to you all day about this. I find it absolutely fascinating. Also from the point of view that it's not just about buying and selling. This is really, it's conversational skills on a one-to-one level, on a day-to-day basis. You're really teaching people how to have better conversations, more productive conversations. So I think that's, in as much as it's a much broader life skill that you really are bringing to the companies. Am I right?
Yeah, it's interesting because I get a lot of people who approach me to kind of speak. Well, I get approached and they kind of go, "We're looking for a motivational speaker," and I kind of go, "Well, I'm not your classic motivational speaker." They go, "Oh, but we hear that you get them all pumped up," and I went, "Well, I'm quite energetic, but I try and give practical takeaways, things that they can implement and go and use straight away." It's not about, for me anyway, or what I find from my clients, is they don't necessarily. My clients don't care if your audience feel warm and fuzzy at the end. Okay, what they really care about is that when you go back to the office and you put some of this stuff into practice, does it make a difference? Does it mean that, because sometimes, like you say, these techniques, some of the stuff I teach, you use on your colleagues, you use with your suppliers, you use with your manager, you use with your team, and they're just really useful things that just help you move things forwards.
Right. Anthony, like I said, I could talk to you all day, but we don't have too much more time. And I'm going to say thank you so much for your time online today. I'm sure that people are going to be very intrigued in terms of how they can use you on their particular events as well. So hopefully, of course, they are going to log in to speakersinc.com. Contact either Duncan or Bronwyn. They'll give you all the details about Anthony, how you book him for your event, and just what you can take away. Added to which, of course, this particular clip will also be on the website if you would like to have a look at that and show it to somebody else in your particular organization. Right now, all that's left for me to do is say thank you very much for being with us today, right here on the Speakers Inc. We Speak Global Speakers Showcase. My name is Dwayne. This has been Anthony Stears, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much.
Bye.